I am Wanda, and I am 58 years old. I thought after 35 years of marriage, I knew every corner of the soul of the man lying motionless in that hospital bed. Frank, my husband, my quiet, steadfast partner. Until Nurse Diane, her face etched with an urgency I had never seen, took my hand in the cold ICU corridor and whispered, "Mrs. Miller, please. You have to bring your daughter here, right now." My confusion in that moment was indescribable. Before I tell you what happened in that room and why that request changed everything I ever knew, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening to this story from? Is it from a quiet space, or are you on your way somewhere? Wherever you are, if you want to walk with me on this journey from darkness into light, please hit that subscribe button. It truly helps me find the courage to keep sharing. The fluorescent lights of Valley Central Hospital had become a second son to me. They bleached the color out of everything, turning the waiting room chairs a sickly gray and making the endless linoleum floors gleam with a perpetual cheerless sheen. This was my world now. For 3 days, it had revolved entirely around room 407, the ICU room where my Frank lay trapped in a silence more profound than any I had known in our 3.5 decades together. Our life back home in Maple Grove, Ohio, felt like a distant sepia-toned photograph. The quiet breakfasts where the only sounds were the crunch of toast and the rustle of the newspaper. The dinners where we ate in a comfortable, if wordless, companionship. I had mistaken that quiet for peace. I had built a life on that stable, predictable ground. Frank was a retired plumber, a man whose hands spoke more than his mouth ever did. He could diagnose a leaking pipe from 2 rooms away, but asking him how his day was yielded little more than a grunt and a shrug. I filled the silence chattering about my volunteer shift at the library, the neighbor's new dog, the price of eggs. I thought I was the color in our black and white movie. The stroke had come on a Tuesday afternoon. He was in the garage tinkering with a leaky faucet he'd insisted on fixing himself. I found him slumped over his workbench, a wrench still clutched in his hand. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens, and my own voice repeating his name like a prayer. In the stark emergency room, Dr. Evans, a neurologist with a kind but unflinching demeanor, laid out the brutal facts. A massive hemorrhagic stroke. Significant swelling. Critical condition. The word coma hung in the air, heavy and final. Now I sat in the rigid chair beside his bed, holding his work-roughened hand. Tubes and wires snaked from his body to a symphony of beeping machines that painted his vital signs in glowing lines. "Frank," I would say, my voice too loud in the sterile quiet. "The magnolia tree in the backyard is starting to bud. Can you believe it? Almost spring." I would talk about anything. Everything, pouring my words into the void, hoping somehow they would seep into him and pull him back to the surface. I was the narrator of our life, desperately trying to read him back into existence. Nurse Diane was a constant during the day shift. She was maybe my age, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a no-nonsense efficiency that should have been comforting, but there was a distance there. When she checked his lines and adjusted his drips, her movements were precise, professional, yet her gaze, when it flicked to me, held something I couldn't name. Not pity exactly, something more complicated. It made me feel like I was missing a page in a medical chart everyone else had read. The call to our daughter Sophie in Chicago was its own kind of agony. Her voice, usually so vibrant and full of city energy, was tight over the phone. "Is he stable?" she asked, the pause speaking volumes. "He's stable, but he's not awake, honey. The doctors say it's serious." I heard her sigh, a long, weary sound. "I've got a huge project deadline, Mom. A client presentation that's been months in the making." My heart clenched. "Sophie, it's your father." "I know who it is," she said, and the ice in her tone shocked me. "Look, I'll come. I need to figure some things out. Ben and I will drive down tomorrow night." "He'd want you here," I insisted, falling back on the old script. "Would he?" The question was quiet, pointed, and it left me speechless. Before I could form a response, she added, "He hasn't really wanted me around for years, Mom. You know that." The line went silent for a beat. "I'll see you tomorrow." After hanging up, a hollow ache settled in my chest. The divide between my husband and my only child was a canyon I had spent years trying to bridge with cheerful platitudes and forced family dinners. I was the shaky rope bridge strung across it, and I felt myself fraying. Later, as I was gathering Frank's personal effects from the admissions bag, his worn wallet, his simple wedding band, a handkerchief, a small yellowed envelope fell to the floor. I picked it up. It was addressed in Frank's unmistakable blocky handwriting, to Sophie. But the name was violently scratched out with black pen, the ink digging into the paper. The envelope was empty. I turned it over in my hands, a cold prickle of unease running down my spine. What was this? A letter he never sent. An apology he couldn't bring himself to make. I shoved it into my purse, a tiny puzzling artifact from the man I was struggling to recognize even as I held his hand. The next 2 days passed in a slow-motion nightmare. Sophie and her boyfriend Ben arrived bringing a gust of cold Chicago air and a palpable tension into the hushed hospital world. Sophie stood in the doorway of the ICU room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked at her father, not with the grief I felt, but with a kind of resigned sadness mixed with something harder. She didn't approach the bed. "Aren't you going to say hello?" I asked, my voice tinged with desperation. "What's the point, Mom?" she whispered, her eyes glistening. "He can't hear me, and even if he could—" She let the sentence hang, shaking her head. Ben, a gentle soul with kind eyes, put a comforting hand on her shoulder. I watched them from my vigil chair. My daughter, a successful graphic designer, so creative and expressive, and my husband, a man of concrete actions and few words. They were like two different species unable to communicate. I had always been the translator, but my translations, I was starting to fear, had been hopelessly flawed. My friend Gloria brought me clean clothes and a thermos of strong coffee. "You have to sleep, Wanda," she urged, her own widow's eyes full of understanding. "I can't," I said. "What if he wakes up and I'm not here?" "He'll know you were," she said softly, but I wasn't so sure. It was during these long hours that I began to notice Nurse Diane's behavior more acutely. She would come in on her rounds, check Frank's pupil response note, the numbers on the monitors. But sometimes she would linger. She would lean close to his face and say very softly, "Mr. Miller, can you hear me? It's Diane." She would watch the heart rate monitor with an intensity that seemed to go beyond clinical observation. Once I saw her glance at the door where Sophie had stood earlier, then back at Frank's still form, a faint line of concentration between her brows. It was as if she was conducting a private experiment, waiting for a result only she expected. On the morning of the 5th day, a new kind of exhaustion set in, one that went bone deep. Hope felt like a distant memory. I stepped out into the hallway just to breathe air that wasn't filtered and antiseptic. I was leaning against the cool wall, my eyes closed, when a hand touched my arm. I jumped. It was Nurse Diane. Her usual professional mask was gone. Her eyes were wide, urgent, and she quickly looked up and down the empty corridor. "Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice low and rushed. "I need you to listen to me. I shouldn't be doing this. I could lose my job, but I've been watching his readings, his subtle physiological responses. I believe he has a level of awareness. I believe he can hear. A spark, fragile and desperate, ignited in my chest. That's wonderful. I talk to him all the time. She shook her head, her grip on my arm tightening just slightly. No, listen. It's not your voice. She swallowed hard, choosing her words with immense care. There are specific stimuli that cause a more pronounced reaction. I am almost certain he needs to hear your daughter's voice. Sophie. Specifically hers. The world tilted. Why, I'm his wife. I've been here every second. Her expression was one of profound empathy and painful knowledge. Mrs. Miller, sometimes what we need to hear most isn't from the ones we love easiest, but from the ones we've hurt the deepest. The words left unsaid, the apologies stuck in the throat. They have a weight. They can hold a soul down, or maybe they can call it back. Please, bring her in here. Now. Trust me. Confusion. Fear and a strange dawning horror swirled inside me. What did she know? What had she seen in this room that I had been blind to? I knotted my throat too tight for words and turned to go find my daughter. The walk back to the family waiting area felt like wading through cement. Sophie was curled in a chair staring at her phone while Ben read a book. They both looked up as I approached. My face must have been a map of my turmoil. Mom. What's wrong? Is it Dad? Sophie was on her feet instantly, the professional coolness gone, replaced by a daughter's raw fear. No. He's the same I managed. It's the nurse. She wants you to come to the room. She thinks it might help if you talk to him. Sophie's face shut down again. Help. How my talking has never helped anything with him. Sophie, please, I begged, my voice cracking. She was so insistent. She said to bring you now. I don't understand it either, but I'm asking you. For me. Ben placed a hand on her back. It's okay, Soph. We'll go with you. We'll just be there. After a long moment, Sophie gave a curt, reluctant nod. The three of us made the silent journey back to the ICU. Nurse Diane was waiting outside the room. She gave Sophie a long, searching look, then nodded to me. Go on in. I'll be right here at the monitors. We entered the familiar space. The beeping, the hum, the sterile smell. Frank lay unchanged. Sophie hovered near the foot of the bed, as far from him as she could get while still being in the room. Ben stood supportively beside her. Say something, honey, I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sophie cleared her throat. Her voice was flat, impersonal. Hi, Dad. It's Sophie. Nothing. The steady beep of the heart monitor continued its monotonous song. A wave of foolish disappointment washed over me. What had I expected? But then, Nurse Diane, who had been staring intently at the screen, made a small, sharp sound. Look, she whispered, pointing. The green line on the cardiac monitor, which had been tracing a steady peaks and valleys rhythm, suddenly spiked, a pronounced, undeniable jump. Then another. Sophie saw it too. Her eyes widened. She took an involuntary step closer. Dad, she said, and this time her voice was softer, laced with a hesitant wonder. Can you hear me? Frank's hand, the one I wasn't holding, twitched. Just a faint tremor of the fingers. It was the first voluntary movement I had seen in days. Keep talking, Nurse Diane urged from her post, her voice gentle but firm. Sophie's composure began to crack. She moved to the other side of the bed opposite me and looked down at her father's face. I remember when I was 7, she began, her words stumbling out. My bike chain came off. You came out of the house with your toolbox. You didn't just fix it. You made me watch. You showed me how to thread it back onto the sprocket, how to check the tension. Your hands were all grease and you were so patient. You never said, let me do it. You said, now you know how. A tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. I'd forgotten that until just now. I watched my own tears flowing silently. My husband was reacting to her. The spike in his heart rate, the twitch in his fingers, they were responses to Sophie's voice, to her memory. A deep, painful realization began to dawn on me. My voice, my constant chatter had been background noise. It was Sophie's voice strained with years of unsaid things that was piercing the fog. Then Sophie looked across the bed at me, her expression a storm of pain and release. Do you know why I've been so angry, Mom? The real reason? It wasn't because he was absent or strict. It was when I was 16. I told you both I wanted to go to art school. You said we'd talk about it. He just looked at me from his chair and said, that's not a practical choice. Just flat, like he was stating a fact about a faulty pipe. She took a shuddering breath. But that's not what broke my heart. What broke it was finding out years later that he secretly paid the tuition for my summer intensive at the Art Institute, the one that cost $2,000. He told the instructor not to tell me it was from him. I found an old receipt in a file of his by accident. Why? Her voice rose, pleading with the unresponsive man in the bed. Why couldn't you just tell me you believed in me? Why did your support have to be a secret? The air was sucked from the room. The constant beeping of the machines seemed to fade into a distant hum. I stared at my daughter, then at my husband, the foundation of my understanding crumbling into dust. He had done that. He had paid for that course. I remembered that summer. Sophie had been ecstatic, saying she'd gotten a need-based scholarship she hadn't even applied for. I had been so proud and so relieved we didn't have to find the money. All these years I had carried a quiet disappointment in Frank for his dismissal of her dream. That disappointment had been a lie. The truth was a hidden act of love so well concealed, it had caused nothing but damage. I felt a physical pain, a wrenching in my core. I had been married to a ghost. A man whose love operated in shadows and silence, whose most meaningful actions were designed to be invisible. I had spent a lifetime listening for words he never spoke, and had completely missed the language of his deeds. The shame was immediate and crushing. What kind of wife was I? Nurse Diane met my gaze. She gave a slight somber nod as if to say, "You're beginning to see." Sophie. I whispered, my voice ragged. Is there more? What else didn't I know? It was as if a floodgate had opened. Through her tears, Sophie spilled a decade of hidden truths. When I first moved to Chicago and my freelance work was sparse, my rent was mysteriously covered for 3 months. The landlord said it was a retroactive insurance adjustment. I found out later from the super that a man matching Dad's description had sent money orders. She wiped her eyes. When that local magazine did a feature on my design firm, a copy of it was in his glove compartment the last time I visited. He'd cut it out and folded it neatly. She looked at Ben, who nodded encouragement. Before our first visit home together, Dad called Ben. He told him to take care of me, that I was more fragile than I looked, and that my passion was my compass, but it could also lead me into storms. He asked Ben to be my anchor. She sobbed. He never said anything like that to me. Each revelation was a scalpel expertly dissecting my 35-year marriage. The quiet man reading the paper wasn't indifferent. He was hiding an article about his daughter. The grunt when I showed him her website wasn't disapproval. It was his awkward, inarticulate pride. His distance wasn't a lack of love. It was a love so terrified of being wrong, of saying the wrong thing, that it chose to act in secret, creating a tragic maze where his affection was the hidden prize and our estrangement was the wall. In the bed, a single clear tear escaped from the corner of Frank's closed eye and traced a path through his stubble. The monitors showed a heart rhythm that was stronger, more organized than it had been since he arrived. "He's listening," Nurse Diane said softly, her own eyes bright. "He's hearing all of it." The emotional storm in the room settled into a heavy, saturated quiet. The truth was out lying among us like shattered glass, sharp and undeniable. I finally found my voice turning to the woman who had orchestrated this painful, necessary confrontation. "How did you know I asked, Nurse Diane?" My words scraped raw. "Why did you ask for this?" Diane leaned back against the monitoring station, her professional armor completely gone. She looked tired and deeply human. "My father," she began, "was a railroad man, strong, silent type. Never said, 'I love you.' Not once. When he was dying of lung cancer, I was so angry. I thought he'd left me with nothing." She paused, gathering the memory, but after he was gone, I started seeing it. The way he'd always fixed my car before I even knew it had a problem. The way he'd save clippings from the newspaper about nursing scholarships and leave them on the kitchen table. He spoke through his hands, through what he did. She looked at Frank with profound recognition. "When I saw Mr. Miller, I saw my dad. The way his vitals would dip just slightly when you were here alone talking about the weather or the neighbors. Then when we'd discuss family in his chart, mention Sophie's name, there'd be a blip, a tiny, consistent physiological response. It was a guess, a gut feeling from one daughter of a quiet man to another. I thought he needed forgiveness, or at least understanding, from the very person he loved in the most confusing way possible. Her explanation didn't lessen my pain, but it framed it. This wasn't about me being a bad wife. This was about a language barrier of the heart. I turned to my daughter. "Sophie, I am so sorry. I'm sorry I never saw it. I'm sorry I tried to paste a happy face over a crack I didn't even understand." Sophie came around the bed and put her arms around me. "Stop it, Mom. It's not your fault. I didn't see it either. I was so busy waiting for him to say the words I refused to see the actions. I built my anger like a wall, brick by brick. In that moment of shared clarity, something shifted in me. The passive, waiting agony dissolved. A new resolve, painful but clear, took its place. I was done waiting for him to wake up and explain. It was time to speak a new language. "Diane, Sophie," I said, wiping my face. "Help me." "What do you need?" Diane asked. "I need to talk to him, but not the way I was." I moved back to Frank's side, but I didn't take his hand. I leaned close so my voice was for him alone. "Frank." I said, my tone different, softer, slower, full of a newfound reverence. "I know now. I know about the art course. I know about the rent. I know you called Ben." Each admission was a key turning in a long locked door inside me. "I am so sorry I never saw your heart. I am sorry I mistook your silence for emptiness. You were building a house of love around us, brick by invisible brick, and I was complaining about the lack of windows." My voice broke. "You loved us in the only way you knew how. And it was real. I see it now." We took turns, then the three of us. Sophie told him about her latest project, speaking directly to him, not at him. Diane would comment on the positive changes in his stats, speaking them aloud, as if he could understand the medical praise. I described the things I now saw with new eyes, the careful way he'd always stacked the firewood, the fact he never forgot to fill my car with gas, the patience in his hands when he taught our daughter to fix a bike chain. We were giving voice to his silent love, translating his life's work into a language we could all finally hear. Frank did not open his eyes. He did not sit up and speak. There was no Hollywood miracle, but something more real, more profound began to unfold. Over the next 48 hours, guided by this new paradigm of communication, his condition improved in steady, measurable increments. The swelling on his brain scans decreased. His levels of consciousness shifted from a deep coma to a minimally conscious state. He began to respond to pain stimuli more consistently. He would occasionally stir a faint moan escaping his lips. Dr. Evans came in for his rounds, his eyebrows climbing as he reviewed the latest charts and scans. He looked from Frank to the three of us gathered around the bed. "I don't know what you all have been doing in here," he said, a note of genuine astonishment in his voice, "but this is a significant neurological improvement. Whatever it is, keep doing it." The validation was a balm. We were not crazy. We were speaking his language and he was in his way answering. The defining moment came 2 days later. Frank was more present. His eyes would flicker beneath their lids. We had established a system: 1 blink for no, 2 blinks for yes. Sophie, her hand resting lightly on his arm, asked Dad, "Can you hear me?" Slowly, with immense effort, his eyelids fluttered. Once. Twice. Yes. Tears streamed down her face. Do you know I love you?" 2 blinks. Yes. Then she asked the harder question, the one that had hung between them for a decade. "Were you proud of me? Of my art?" A single tear pooled in the corner of his eye again, and then definitively 2 blinks. Yes. Yes. My turn. I leaned in. "Frank, do you have something you want to say to me?" 1 blink. Yes. My heart leapt. "Can you try 1 long, strained blink?" No. The hope curdled into a fresh ache. He was trapped aware, but the words were still beyond his reach. But then I remembered. I remembered the empty, scratched-out envelope. I remembered a lifetime of actions over words. I took his hand, the one that had fixed so many things, and I brought it to my cheek. "It's okay." I whispered the truth of it, settling deep into my soul. "It's okay, Frank. You don't have to say it. I finally understand. We don't need the words anymore. We'll learn to listen a different way." And in that moment, the tension seemed to leave his body. The monitors settled into a steady, strong rhythm. He had been heard. Frank's journey out of the ICU was slow, and his road ahead is long and uncertain. He was transferred to a specialized neurorehabilitation unit. He will likely never walk without assistance again. His speech, if it returns, will be halting and difficult. He is a man remade by trauma, both physical and emotional. My own healing had to begin in the rubble of my old understanding. The initial pain was a swallowing guilt. I felt like a fraud. I had shared a bed, a home, a life with a man whose inner world was a foreign country I never bothered to visit. I had loved a caricature, the strong, silent type, while missing the complicated, fearful, deeply loving man underneath. The path back started in a place I never expected: a support group for families of stroke survivors. In a church basement surrounded by other shell-shocked spouses and children, I told my story. Not about the stroke, but about the silence. about the envelope, the hidden tuition, the secret rent. And a remarkable thing happened. Hands went up. A woman whose husband never praised her cooking but always ate 3 helpings. A man whose father never said he was proud but kept every little league trophy in his garage. Story after story of love spoken in a dialect of action often misunderstood as indifference. I began to keep a new kind of journal, not a diary of my days, but a frank journal. In it, I didn't record what he said. I recorded what he did. The way his eyes followed Sophie around the room during her visits. The faint squeeze of his fingers when I read him an article about plumbing innovations, his interest not mine. The soft sigh he made when I played old Johnny Cash albums. I was learning to be an archaeologist of his soul, sifting through the small, silent artifacts for meaning. My relationship with Sophie transformed. The forced cheer and unspoken tension evaporated. We now spoke openly, honestly about the past. We grieved the misunderstandings together. We marveled at the hidden love we had uncovered. She and Ben visit often, and she talks to her father about colors, about design software, about city life. He listens. He blinks. He is present. And Frank and we are building a new marriage from the ground up. It is quieter than before, but infinitely more profound. Our love is no longer an assumption. It is a daily conscious practice. It is in the patience of feeding him, in the gentle adjustment of his pillow, in the hours spent sitting together, not needing to fill the space with sound. The love is in the tending. I finally hear the melody he's been playing all along. The lesson I learned in that ICU room at 58 is this. Love is not always a grand opera. Very often it is a faint, persistent hum coming from the next room. Our task is not to demand it become a symphony, but to quiet ourselves enough to hear its frequency. And sometimes the loudest silence is the one that saves a life and mends a family. Frank is still with us. Every day is a new page in a book we are learning to read together, and I am finally fluent in the language of my husband's heart. So I want to ask you from my heart to yours. Have you ever missed a quiet hum of love from someone in your life? Have you been waiting for words while their hands were speaking volumes? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please give this video a like. It lets me know these shared experiences matter. And if you want to join me for more stories about finding light in unexpected places, consider subscribing and sharing this with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you for listening and for being part of this community. May you have the peace and the quiet clarity to hear the love that speaks without a sound.